Hello and welcome to the EXP Required podcast where we talk about Final Fantasy and other things. I am Jack and I'm joined by Mol. How are you doing, Mol?
I'm not too bad today. It's sad we don't have a guest on for the first time in a little while. However, I am feeling the love today, Jack. What about yourself?
Yes, I am too, because it is Valentine's Day. It's not a time of recording, but it is Valentine's Day when you're listening, or after Valentine's Day when you're listening. Basically, it's a love day.
The loveliest day of the year. Nothing to do with Hallmark or corporations or extracting money from people. No. It's all about the love.
Happy Love Day, everyone! I love you, as The Simpsons said. Basically, yeah, this is in the same style as our top 14 Final Fantasy lists, so we're going to have a little bit of a competition. With that list, we had the 14 mainline games, and we ranked them from 1 to 14, making our list average out. But also, what I will be doing at some point is probably posting either of our lists on YouTube or Blue Sky or wherever, and letting people vote on who they thought had a better list.
I cannot wait until the fans get a hold of it and then just beat us to death for having the wrong opinions about ships.
It'll be interesting to see who wins as well.
Yeah.
But the idea is that we will combine our lists at the end and then average it out. So the idea is that, like, you know...
Ooh, we're going to have an EXP required top couple, are we?
Yeah, so we realised this would be difficult without a discrete list of things, as there were way more than 16 Final Fantasy couples.
Way more. I think ultimately the list that you came up with was 36, wasn't it?
Something like that. Probably missed some, and then we'll be picked up by someone for missing a couple somewhere.
Of course.
So we didn't want this podcast to go on too long, so we decided before on a short list. I mean, it's Valentine's Day. I'm sure a lot of people have other things they want to do.
Like what? What would other people
like playing
be doing?
Final Fantasy games.
Yeah.
So the rules for the short list are, because essentially we went for 16, because why not? 16 is the magic number. A character can only appear once. So, controversially, there can be no Cloud and Aerith and Cloud and Tifa appearing.
You had to pick one. So, sorry for all the Clariths and the... Oh God, what do they call them? Cliffers out there? Like, we're not trying to start any... No, Jack. Jesus Christ. We're not trying to start any ship wars for once in our life. I think the FF7 fans have got us covered on that base anyway. But yeah, it really is a case of we just didn't want to oversaturate the list.
Yes, and that will annoy a lot of people, but don't worry, we got a way around that. There's max 2 couples per game because Mol's a monster. I said 3. But no, we can only have 2 couples per game. The exceptions on this list are 10, 12, 13 and 15. Because there's no decent couples in that game.
Yeah.
Sorry, did I say that out loud? That spoils what the list is going to be, doesn't it? And again, something else Mol's put in, which felt like I was being told off, but probably in the right way. Don't just pick couples because you like the game they're in. Be prepared to defend your choices with an exclamation mark.
I'm telling you, this is serious business, Jack. You don't know what you're getting into. Before we actually jump into the list proper, I did have a question that I wanted to ask you personally.
Oh, God.
I know that you've said previously that you're not really engaged with fandom as a whole, and that's completely fair. You know, the games are the games. The fandom is a completely separate beast. What do you actually know of shipping culture and the fandom at large?
I'm really glad you asked me that, and it's great that this isn't in the notes, because one thing I was thinking about doing before I decided to do the intro doing a bit was to maybe dive into shipping and stuff like that. All I really know about shipping is that a lot of people complain about it.
Yes.
And I presume it's because, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I presume it's because people are, usually treating the women character as if they're just an object. I guess that's the problem people have got with it.
Kind of, but mostly no. So... I'd never really talked about this before on the podcast. It's never really come up. It hasn't been relevant. But rather than have a background in game design or game journalism or anything like that, I'd consider myself to have a background in fandom, insofar as I've written fanfic, I've drawn fan art over the age. You know, I was a teenager in school and I had access to pens and pencils and I loved Final Fantasy. What else was I going to be fucking doing? But it's allowed me to see the way that other people have interacted with the games as well. The shipping culture is one of those things that a lot of people will have heard of, and not just relegated to Final Fantasy. This is across the board for games, for anime, for, I'm sure, plenty of other medias as well. But it's very simply, in my opinion, comes down to this is a sandbox with characters in a world that have already been created for you. And if you like the way that 2 characters look, you're just going to mush them together. It's playing Barbies at the heart of it. Unfortunately, because the internet is so vast and varied and everyone has an opinion that they think is the correct opinion, this does lead to people thinking that one character and another character potentially should be the be-all, end-all, and that devalues everybody else's experience. So I'm going to cite FF7 specifically as an example here, because Cloud and Aerith and Cloud and Tifa has been an ongoing fandom war for, well, since 97, I think. And all it really comes down to is, well, which one is the canon couple? Which one is the correct one to put your back into? And there is no right answer. You know, these games do tend to have a canonical couple by the end of it, but, you know, there's no right answer in the way of you can enjoy fandom any fucking way you want. If you want to ship Aerith and Tifa together, if you want to ship Cloud and Barrett together, fucking go for it. It doesn't matter if it happens in the game or not. It doesn't invalidate your personal experiences and what you think should happen. Everyone has a different interpretation. We've been through this before. They're fictional characters. Just play nice, kids, in the sandbox.
Yeah, I know that the term actually I got from, here's another one of the tangents I go on, is from Stargate, because there's a couple in Stargate. Within the series, they were never confirmed a couple.
Right.
Because they were in the military. So one of the things Stargate had is obviously it was a military show where people go to other planets. It was a sci-fi military type show. I always describe it as Army Man in space or Special Ops in space. It's not really a sci-fi show in the traditional sense. Probably why it's my favourite, because, you know, traditionality is not really my thing. But from what I understand, because of the US military was quite involved with them, and they sort of, like, you know, for want of a better term, sponsored them, and it was like a press relations type thing. They weren't allowed to make the two people that were in the military, bearing in mind that one of them was the direct commanding officer of the other, be in a relationship. So there was always, like, you know, will they, won't they going on. And obviously, like with sci-fi, you can go to different timelines, and every time they were in a different timeline, one of them wasn't in the military and they were together. Really interesting storytelling, but essentially by the end of the series, it was never quite confirmed they were in a relationship. It was open to interpretation. And I know a lot of people got quite annoyed about that, probably for the same reasons of, I want them to tell me what the official thing is. It's like, well, pretentious as it might sound, the journey is the interesting part.
No, completely.
And I think it's the same thing for any form of relationship. Obviously, we're talking in a sense about romantic relationships, as it is the season and all that. But I think, you know, especially with storytelling and stuff like that, the journey is the fun part, you know, and coming up with the sort of discussions as to why you think things go on. Obviously made a joking reference to Kudra and the Auctioneer in Final Fantasy 9. I had to get that in now. That's a bit of a silly, like, point. That's something that actually could happen. Like, I mean, it's stupid and nonsense because it's me being silly and trying to make a meme with Mutski, and it seems to have worked. But, you know, it's like, you know, why not? And I think, like you say, the sandbox analogy of, like, putting yourself in the game or trying to, you know, like you say, playing Barbies or Beanie Babies, as I used to do, because I didn't own any Barbies and stuff like that, where, you know, you put these, you know, characters in your own world. I think it's a healthy thing. And then trying to make everyone think like it's that their way isn't official. I understand that being frustrating, but yeah, thanks for enlightening me a little bit, because I've never really dived into it.
Dived. No, it's one of those things that I've always really appreciated in a non-romantic sense as well, because there is so much fic out there that isn't dedicated to romantic relationships. I mean, there are people who have written murder mysteries that are fanfic. There are people that have done deep dives into characters. There is plenty of porn and relationship stuff out there, don't get me wrong, but it's not necessarily...
Where can I find it?
It's called archiveofourown.org. But it's one of those things of, like, you can do absolutely anything. There is no default for fandom. And one of the things that I find really, really fun to do as I suppose, kind of a retired creator now, because I don't exactly have the time to be doing fanfics and fan art anymore, but is to...
Just talk about it instead, it's cool.
Yeah, pretty much. But is to... You get a better sense of a character if you put them into different situations. It doesn't have to be romantic, but other characters are always going to be there, and you're only going to get the best results if you bounce one character off of another. Again, doesn't have to be romantic, but you can imagine and you can play so many interesting things just by tweaking something slightly. Maybe Cloud is into Tifa. Maybe Cloud is into Aerith. Who knows? But his interactions certainly change depending on what you do. So that's my stance on shipping. Whether or not that's the right stance is up for debate, but I like to think I'm very easygoing and that it's it just makes it a bit nicer for everyone rather than arguing that my ship's the best, which is, of course, exactly what we're going to be doing today.
Yeah, there's some irony in that. It's one of the reasons why I thought, I mean, to be fair, I thought you'd have something to say on it as well, and left it out because I'm not as qualified on that area of stuff as well. But there is some irony in the fact that I was going to try and, make some comment about what I've seen about shipping and the fact that some people get upset about that being left out, which I don't like. And there's some irony in the fact that we're literally going to throw our own opinions on it, jump all over how we think it might be a bit toxic, and then go and be our own toxic. But I think one thing I've tried to do in my list, this is a good segue into how you found the process and stuff like that before we get into it, is that while I was going through it, at first I thought it was quite hard. I went from doing my top ones first, and then sort of like went down to things I found less interesting, and then made a few tweaks as I went down. But I found myself ranking these based off of how they tie in with the story and how developed the people are within the couples and how developed the couples are and things like that, which is why I'll have more of a surprising list than you think I might have, if for want of a better term, because I've not gone stereotypical and gone, right, that's, the obvious ones are going to be the top. I don't think, certainly obvious ones you think I'd go for, I guess, without wanting to assume what you think I'd think, which is now getting really confusing and weird. But yeah, I tried to sort of think about the whole picture, and like you just said there about, two people in conflict or not non-conflict and how that builds into a story in the world around them. I consider that with everything I did. What about yourself?
Yeah, that's a really interesting way of doing it, actually. Just like you, I had a lot of trouble actually putting this together. I think it probably took me a couple hours to really sit down and finalise my list. I tried going with the ones that I liked the best at first, found it way too difficult, had to start at the other end and kind of just knock them out process of elimination style. Kind of like you, I was thinking of the overall story, but for the most part, I was thinking of how they actually interact with each other and how their relationships are depicted on screen. Whether I found them realistic, things I enjoyed about them, things I didn't enjoy about them. Overall, the story doesn't really play into it, I think, as much as you've probably given it merit to do, but it's definitely there.
Yeah, well, we'll find out when we get into more detail and the discussion and argument and everything in a bit. But it sounds like we're going to have very different lists, which could make it very interesting to see what the final list ends up like. I'm very excited.
I have an idea of what I think you might have picked. Whether or not it's correct, I couldn't tell you.
I have no idea what you've picked. I think there's one that I think you're going to put quite high.
Okay.
But other than that, I haven't got a clue. But to be fair, like the ones I've sort of like, the heart picks are probably a little bit further down than where I think the sort of important ones are. So
fair enough.
Before we get into the actual shortlist, I think it's probably a good idea to go through and talk about the honourable mentions. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to sort of like do this chronologically, and I'll talk about the couples in these games that we don't mention in the shortlist. So basically, this is a very, very quick spoiler for like 5 minutes time when I go into it and explain what our actual shortlist is. I'll probably miss some couples here and there, I'd imagine. Again, this is mainline games. Obviously, there's going to be a little bit of spillover because of the compilation definitely features in some ways, and 10-2 and things like that. Like the influence of those games may feature a little bit, but basically no online games again, because I haven't got a fucking clue about online games.
And no side titles either, so unfortunately no tactics characters.
The only side games that are mentioned are ones that link to the mainline series. So so no Kingdom Hearts, I'm afraid. So what I'm going to do, Mol, is I will go through each game one at a time, and feel free to interject on each one if you'd like, to add a bit of flavour, but try not to mention the actual picks. Obviously, it's difficult not to completely, but we'll just talk around the honourable mentions and the vibe of that game, I guess.
Take it away, Jack.
So, Final Fantasy 1. I'm sure the fantasies going on in this game are plentiful, as it's the most sex-free thing ever. Every NPC you meet lives in a cave and or castle on their own, with the only thing close to sucking going on being the vampire. So that's my take on Final Fantasy 1. Any thoughts?
I'd say that my main thought on FF1 is I definitely think there's tension between Red Mage, Black Mage, and White Mage. Other than that, no care whatsoever.
That's 8-bit theatre that's making you think that. Nothing to do with the actual game. A game that lets you pick what the fuck's going on yourself. Yeah, they weren't quite there with the... I suppose the only thing that comes close to an actual relationship in this game is probably like when Garland kidnaps the princess. You could argue that's the princess in the tower thing and she will marry me. I don't think it actually says that, but whatever. Final Fantasy 2. So apparently Firion and Maria are a couple, but I don't think that's really a thing in the main game, but gets expanded upon a novelization or something.
See, and that was really interesting when you highlighted that one to me, because in the game, the main party, sans the missing fourth member at all time, they're all adopted siblings. So the fact that they actually chose to go for that route in the novelization is absolutely bizarre to me.
Yeah, well, why not?
Yeah, fuck it, why not?
Final Fantasy 3, your favourite. So in this game, Princess Sarah, or Sarah, makes some advances towards the main character, particularly at the end. And we have two couples, Sid and his wife, and Desh and Selena.
It's interesting that you say that about Sarah and the main character, actually, because I know for the DS version, there was definitely some character injected into the characters. I believe there is something of a ship tease with the character Ingus and the Princess Sarah of that game, which is very much a princess and knight kind of dynamic. I go for it, but, overall, it's not really in the forefront of anyone's mind. I think the biggest romantic relationship in that game is when the Cloud of Darkness fucked me all those years ago.
Right, so moving on swiftly to Final Fantasy IV. A little bit of a love triangle going on between Kain, Cecil and Rosa, but that's all I'll say about this game for now. Spoiler alert, quite like the main game, Kain gets no look in here. Sorry, buddy. Final Fantasy V. No real lovely stuff here, except Boko and another Chocobo, as we talked about before. None of the main cast get any, but Boko is having a whale of a time. Also, we mentioned before that Bart looks up the word ass in a dictionary, so I don't know whether he was looking for pictures to do whatever he was doing, but there is literally, there is nothing between the main cast, really.
And it's interesting because you'd expect it by this point of the game's life cycle, or the franchise's life cycle, rather.
Yeah, 5 kind of went, nope, too much love will kill you and all that, and then it just got into fucking weird trees and stuff like that. The Gilgamesh probably,
Gilgamesh
did something.
Gets around.
Yeah, well, he literally gets to other universes.
Exactly.
Final Fantasy VI. So Locke has a pretty important relationship with Rachel, who he let down before the game's narrative. Also, there's Maduin and Madeline, who are Terra's parents, who have a largely off-screen impact in the game. This is the same with Setzer and Daryl, who are apparently lovers and also rival airship pilots. Though these couples just drive the characters in terms of motivation and aren't really well sort of fleshed out couples per se. I think they're kind of like
their background
motivation
established.
pieces. Yes.
Yeah.
The Rachel one's probably the most significant in the story, but then again, it's the influence on the other couples that we'll talk about later. I think you've probably worked out who we're talking about from 6 at this point. 7, right, there's a lot of stuff which is touched on here, expanded in the compilation. The main 2 being Lucrezia and Vincent, which is expanded upon a lot in Dirge of Cerberus, if you have lots of patience. I actually don't mind the game. I may have joked about how much I dislike it, but there's lots of like long drawn out cutscenes trying to piece together Vincent's background with Lucrezia. I don't really know it fully, but I know that there's definitely some kind of like romantic vibe going on there. I guess you know more about than I do.
All I know is that Lucrezia chose badly by ending up with Hojo. It's interesting, Final Fantasy VII actually has a fair amount of background romance going on. It's never the forefront for the most part, but it's consistently there and pretty decently represented, I'd say.
Final Fantasy VIII. So, this is just rabbit breeding season, this game. The game's narrative is built around the romance here for the first time, really. I mean, obviously, it touched upon it in 6 and 4, but this is where the game is based around the romance. There's the love triangle with Sifa, Renoa, and Squall. Quite limited stuff between Irvine and Selphie. I think it's sort of hinted upon that he's crushing on her, and I think in the end, it's implied that she's jealous of him looking at other girls and stuff like that. Quistis is obviously into Squall. Laguna spreads his seed around the known world, literally, in many ways.
I'm saying nothing, but I'm shaking my head for the viewers listening, just so they're aware.
There's another sort of love triangle with Caraway, General Caraway, Laguna, and Julia, where I think Caraway kind of sends Laguna off so he can, get with Julia, who's obviously Renoa's mother. If you want an excellent watch on those parallels between the sort of generational couples, then obviously Game Dub's video, I think it's the generational trauma video.
Yes.
She goes into a brilliant perspective on that.
Excellent analysis video. Everyone should go watch it.
Kind of against the, I want to say in some ways, lazy thing that people. I mean, if you've got the opinion, it's fine. But I think there's sometimes people can jump on the whole that Squall and Renoa got together because Laguna and Julia didn't. I think May kind of touches upon something that a lot of people don't touch upon, which is probably one of the reasons why she's popular. So yes, go and check her stuff out. Friend of the podcast. I've always wanted to say that. We've also got Sorceress Adia, is also with everyone's favourite war criminal, Sid Kramer. He's punching, let's be honest. I mean, come on. We haven't quite got into the depths of how much we think that the real villain of Final Fantasy VIII is Sid, but clearly crime pays because, Sorceress Adia is hot.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's something that's, again, another thing that's in the background. It's I guess it's kind of important to the narrative, but it's more important to the narrative that Sorceress Adia is essentially their matron, or matron, as I used to call her back in the day. So, yes, so that's it for 8. Final Fantasy 9. So the one we've left out here is Steiner and Beatrix, who have a mostly implied relationship until towards the end of the game. It's kind of based on a rivalry, and it's nice, but not top tier, or so Mol thinks, because I put it in my shortlist. There's also the Moogles, Mogata, and Mogmi, who we left out, and then realised when we made a video recently, oh my god, why did we leave these people out? They're on the honeymoon in Gizlamuk's grotto. I'm gutted they couldn't make the cut, but whatever,
Listen, that motherfucker told me he hated me after I didn't give him Kupo nuts too many times. He's on my shit list.
He set us on dragons as well, which we lost to first time, regardless of what YouTube commenters might say. Sid and Hilda, obviously, I like that dynamic. Basically, it's this sort of classic fairy tale, turning him into a frog, but an oglop in this, because he cheated on her. Yeah,
I really liked the dynamic that they had on screen. It just isn't at the forefront, so I didn't think it was as important as other relationships.
No, I think you're right. Final Fantasy X. So I think 10-2, which I've not finished yet, expands upon Lulu and Wakka's relationship. But 10 mainly deals with Lulu grieving the loss of Chappu, who is Wakka's brother. She clearly has a very specific type, i.e. keep it in the family. That's all I'll say. What can I do for you? Indeed. Final Fantasy 12. I think Fran and Balthier is implied, or maybe that's just fan fiction. That's all I'll say.
See, I think that one's kind of just a difference in perspective, because I completely understand where people come from with the romance angle with those two, but I've never seen it personally. They are partners in crime as the only canonical thing. It's interesting, 12 doesn't really go in for romances, so the fact that we were able to pick one out was, I think
you picked that out, well done.
Yeah, feat of strength.
I mean, to be fair, could you blame either of them for like wanting to canoodle?
Can you blame me for wanting to be in the middle of it?
Right, Final Fantasy 13 and 15, we're not leaving anyone out here. I've not played the sequels of 13, so I'm sure there's other things going on there, but we're not getting to that just yet. Final Fantasy 16. Honourable mention here is Kupka and Benedicta. So something which I don't think we really went into much in our 16 episode. It's interesting to see a villain couple,
yes,
which is relatively well thought out. Obviously, we had our problems with the characterization, particularly the female characterization in that game, but I do think it's cool how they both have personal motivations.
Because I was actually really quite sold on Kupka and Benedicta, and I think the main thing about it is that they both felt very sincere in their feelings toward each other. I know there's definitely an aspect of, is Benedicta using him and is Kupka being blinded by Windpuss, for lack of a better term, but overall it felt like a very sincere relationship, especially on Kupka's side. So that one only barely didn't make the cut.
I think so, because it's very interesting. I think, unfortunately, Benedict is not in the game long enough for them to really be...
Yeah.
Obviously, they are a couple, and it's a big sort of part of the game.
It would have been interesting to see how it had developed if she'd been around for longer.
I think so, but it certainly impacts his characterization. It really... And, of course, you know, Clive and Sid's relationship with her, Kupka's relationship with her, creates a lot of the tension later on in the story. So it's probably the 17th position, I think, on this list, I would argue. But whatever, there are two better couples in Final Fantasy 16, is all I'll say. So that's our honourable mentions.
In that case, then, do you want to move on without any further ado to the actual shortlist?
I think that's a good idea. So the actual shortlist is in no particular order. Well, actually, the order I think is...
Just going by games, yeah.
Going by games. We got FF4, we got Cecil and Rosa. We also got Edward and Anna. 6, we've got Locke and Celes, or Celes, or whatever you want to call her. We've also got Cyan and Elaine, because Mol's a monster. FF7 has Cloud and Tifa. FF7 has Zack and Aerith. They're happy. That has solved the problem, because you could argue that Zack's technically Cloud for the game. There we go. That's it. That is our way of dealing with it.
Set off.
But it doesn't matter. That's our way of patching it so that people can have their way. FF8 Squall and Renoa. FF8 Laguna and Rain, because I had to die on that hill. FF9 Zidane and Garnet. Also Freya and Fratley. FF10 Tidus and Yuna. FF12 Ash and Rassler. FF13 Sarah and Snow. FF15 Luna and Noctis. FF16 Clive and Jill. And FF16 Dion and Sir Terence.
Of course. So I think that's a pretty good list to get started with.
We haven't mentioned quite yet the how the ranking works. So essentially, we've got 16 positions on the list. So if I pick something at 16, it gets 1 point. And then if Mol were to pick something at position 1, it gets 16 points.
Yes.
And the idea is that if Mol ranks something very low and I rank it very high, it ends up in the middle, effectively. Yeah. It's going to be an interesting one, this, because I think with the best Final Fantasy games, like, I think most of the stuff that was good went towards the top. I think obviously you're wound up that Final Fantasy 7 was so low, even though it's the third position. I think that was probably, you know, the heart picks lined up with a kind of, but this is going to be an interesting one, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like I've used my brain a bit more rather than my heart overall, because there are definitely ships on this list that I feel very strongly about in my heart, and yet I've not given them the ranking that I would otherwise. Yeah, I'm interested to find out. So should we go in at position number 16 then?
Let's go for it. So do you want to go first?
Yeah, I might as well. I'm gonna throw a massive curveball right at the very beginning. My absolute last position, Cloud and Tifa.
What?
Yep.
Oh, shots fired.
I've never vibed with it. I'm sorry, FF7 fandom. I know they're technically considered canon, but I just don't see it. I don't see it lasting. In my eyes, Cloud is both too fruity and too depressed to be anywhere near a functioning relationship. You know, to even the playing field, I'll also say I don't see him ending up with Aerith either in a world where Aerith survives. Cloud does not seem like someone who's suited to a relationship, in my opinion, and that's why this gets last place. I also think Tifa could do so much better, but that's a completely different conversation.
Yeah, we'll get to that conversation later. I agree with that. So I've got that. Actually, it's not that high. I've got it at position 8.
8? Okay, that's a lot higher than I would have ever given it.
The reason I like it, right, because I kind of agree with you in a sense that I don't think either of those typical relationships are that strong.
Yeah.
certainly from a romantic sense. But what I do like about Cloud and Tifa is that they're friends. They're childhood friends. That I'll come back for you, let's promise it stuff is really cool.
Yeah.
The dynamic around Tifa believing in Cloud when he assists Avalanche, which keeps the game going, and how she won't leave him in Medeal when he's in the wheelchair. I really like that. There's obviously the implied banging under the high wind.
Which is an optional scene. You only get that scene if your relationship points with Tifa are high enough, which I think is the other factor of why it's not necessarily a canon thing.
In Advent Children are in different beds, aren't they? So, I mean, it's one of those things where, like, their relationship as friends, I think, is really, really strong.
Yeah.
I put it quite low. Well, not as low as you, but 8 is relatively low. But I think in the original game, it seems one-sided as well, because Tifa seems more into Cloud than Cloud's into Tifa.
To be fair, man has a lot of personal problems going on in their original game.
Totally. I think that's right, and stuff like that. And of course, I think because they're going for the whole you can choose what's going on, where you can like change relationship points with everyone in that game, adds to that. And I think the compilation, more so actually the remake and probably Rebirth, which we've not got to yet, expand upon that stuff a bit more, probably because of the vocal performances and the facial expressions that they've got in those games and stuff like that, which is not what we're really talking about here. But I get why. I'm not mortified you've put this at the bottom position, but a little bit surprised. But I think I vibe with the whole childhood friends thing.
Yeah, I'm completely with you. I think they work fantastically as childhood friends who are trying to work a very uncomfortable and awkward situation, who eventually have a friendship that is stronger than anything else. I just don't see them as a romantic couple.
Fair enough.
Right, which brings us to...
my 16th. Right, 16, unsurprisingly, is Cyan, or Printer Ink, Cyan, and Elaine.
Right, okay.
The reason this is at the bottom, and it is influenced a bit by the fact I think Cyan's a bit of a dick, but she hasn't really got any character.
No.
Like, there's a scene in the game, which I think you'd argue is optional, but I think most of Final Fantasy VI's endgame is optional. I don't think I'm going to hold that against it. Is that essentially he feels a loss for his family.
Yeah.
It's not just his wife. I think he's a little girl he's got. I can't remember.
I think it's a son, but it's also the rest of Doma as well. Like he's
I mean, the fact I didn't know proves how insignificant I thought it was in the narrative. I think that, I suppose it's a little bit influenced by the fact that I hate that part of the game when you go and rescue him and goes that flipping weird world where you fight those weird dolls.
Soul Eater, fuck that.
Which just fucking sucks. And I don't like his character. And of course, later on, I mean, you could argue it shouldn't really affect it. His sending letters to that woman out of the cave stuff, it just puts him down my list. And the fact that Elaine hasn't really got any characterization puts no points for her. So
it's the anime dead wife, dead mother trope. We know that he had a person in his life and that she was important, but she's dead. And the only part of her character that is important is relating to his character. That's it. It is unfortunately lazy storytelling, but I can almost excuse it in a game like this where the cast is so big and he's not the only person that really gets that treatment. I mean, we see it with Setzer and Daryl. We kind of see it with Locke and Rachel as well. It's a character establishing thing rather than an overt looking over of another female character, in my opinion. For me, I've put them at position number 14. Right. And the only reason that I've done that is because the grief that Cyan feels, and again, this isn't just for Elaine, this isn't just for his son, this is the grief that he feels for all of Doma is really, really palpable, and I thought really quite well done, and that was enough to elevate it from just slightly off the ground for me. It's interesting because in my notes I have also written that Cyan ruined it by catfishing that girl, so, you know.
That's something that's really hard to ignore, but I think it's interesting because I think you've probably explained it because I think you were the one that put this into the shortlist. I think you're right. It probably of all of the, I mean, Locke and Rachel, I mean, Locke, we'll get to it in a bit. Locke has a much better actual relationship with someone else. So we couldn't have two names twice. So the reason that Locke and Rachel, I think, didn't make it is because of that. This was probably the next best of the ones in Final Fantasy VI. Daryl and Setzer's quite limited, and I think that Madu and Madeleine they're kind of like MacGuffins, aren't they? You know,
yeah, that is nothing but expository.
Exactly. So I do agree that it fits very well with the theme. Like the theme of loss fits in quite well. But who's Elaine? Who do we know?
We do not know, and we do not care. There are other better characters to think about, apparently.
So did you want to pick your 15th, or do you want me to go for my 15th?
Let's hear yours, Jack. What was your number 15?
My 15th on this list, Sarah and Snow in Final Fantasy 13.
Wow, okay, wasn't expecting that.
Just from 13, as I've told you, I've not played the sequels. I don't know how much it expands on those storylines. I believe Sarah's in 13 too, a bit more.
Yes.
So Sarah, to me, feels a lot more like a destination, or as I use the term there, MacGuffin, than a fully drawn-out character. Probably influenced by the fact that I've not completely drawn credits on the 13 yet, I guess. I think I know what happens. So she's important to the story. I will jump on the fact that I think Sarah, like as a destination for everyone, sort of gelling everyone together, I really like that. But obviously a good motivation for Snow, but their relationship, it feels a bit, I don't know, like, I don't really buy it. I think it's just like she's my little princess and I'm going to save her. It just feels a bit weak to me.
That's completely fair. It's interesting that you brought that up because I do not disagree with you whatsoever, but I buy it.
Right.
The fact that they're both so young and they are so... maybe headstrong isn't the right word to use in Sarah's defense, but like they're both just young and living life, and it's that dumb puppy love that, like, you know, they're very teenage, they're very young adult about it, that kind of just like, I can see that happening, and that's why I think it works. I think Sarah's absence in the game actually makes it work more than if she was around. I think having her as the destination rather than having her in the party, because originally she was slated to be the 7th party member. So I have no idea how the game would have changed if she actually was in the party, but I don't think that the relationship would have been for the better in that case. I will also say 13-2, Sarah is the main protagonist. You do get a little bit more extrapolation on her relationship with Snow. Not a huge amount. It stays to me feeling very, very similar to the way that it feels in FF13. But yeah, I don't know. There's something about it that's just, they've sold me on it somehow. I think they're both kind of annoying about it, and I don't think they'll last, but, you know, for the time being, sure, go for it, whatever.
She clearly likes very big men.
Yes.
But that's all I'll say. It's a massive, just pointing out a massive size difference. Like, I mean, that's whatever. But that is quite alarming when you watch the game. One other thing I will point out as well with this, and again, I will talk about 13 at some point. I don't think it's romantic. I don't think it's supposed to be romantic. But I prefer the tension between Lightning and Snow.
You've brought that up a few times to me offline, and that's something that I see even less than I see Cloud and Tifa, if I'm honest.
You think? Well, I don't. It's not because I think that they necessarily would be a couple, but they are. There is a bit of a sibling sort of thing going on there. But it's sort of the arguments they have. It's almost like it feels like it's substituting the fact that Sarah isn't there to argue with. Yeah. It's almost like Lightning is deciding to talk for Sarah, and that's kind of frustrating because I think that, again, Sarah just becomes like a bit of an object in the game for everyone, and because of that, it kind of influences me to think that whenever the flashbacks come, you know, for Sarah and Snow's segments. I think it was when we were talking to Alleyway Jack Will, another friend of the podcast. He was talking about, was it the unreliable narrator? I get the vibe that when they're looking back on those flashbacks, it's not showing what happened, it's showing what they remember happening. So to me, it feels a little bit like that this is what they remember of Sarah, and this is what they think and what she means to them, as opposed to what they mean to Sarah, which I think if you've played 13-2, I guess the fact that you've had that kind of acknowledgement of the fact that it's the same from her perspective probably would bump this up a little bit.
It'll be interesting to revisit this conversation when we finally get around to talking about 13 specifically, and I think it would be really, really interesting to revisit it for a second time if you ever get around to playing 13 too. I'd be really interested to know if your feelings on that change.
I love her design, by the way. I think I think with the teenagery type thing, I think either that's that she vibes that really well. Like you just described there.
It's a very cute outfit, and honestly, I think we should see Snow wearing it. But no, for Sarah and Snow, I've actually put them at position number 7.
Well, so we've pretty much been quite balanced with what we've done so far.
I thought that this might be the case.
It's going to get interesting towards the top. It's when you put next, you put something that's right at the top for me. That's I'm going to be like, whoa.
In my position number 15, then I've gone for Luna and Noct. Now, I struggled a bit with this because I can see the vision. I can see where they were going with this. However, in the game itself, they don't even communicate to each other directly. They have no chemistry. They have nothing going for them. I'd say the only real thing in the base game that I can really vibe with is the like sun, moon, light, dark dichotomy thing going on. And that's just a visual thing. That's not even their characters. I'm sorry, I can see it. I can buy it for the sake of this is what the story is telling me is going on. But like, nah, it didn't happen. I'm sorry, guys.
So number 1, no, it's not number 1. I couldn't even bring myself to complete that joke. I put this at position 14.
14, yeah, that's fair enough.
So a lot of the snags I've got with this are very similar to the ones I've got with Sarah and Snow.
Right.
Luna Freya is an objective. Yeah. Luna Freya is not a character. Yeah. Or not a very well written and thought out character. I don't think even as well written and thought out as Sarah is in 13.
I would argue much less, yeah.
Unfortunately, the narrative treats her as an objective. I mean, in a sense, because they've gone for the whole, bros, bachelor pad, road trip thing, in a way that kind of makes sense with the story that they're trying to tell, but that doesn't make me rank them as a couple any higher. I don't buy them as a couple at all. No. What I did like, and I think you've alluded to there with the sun and the moon thing, I like the way that they communicate with the book and the dog. That's quite cute. That's kind of like a childhood, this is how we communicated as kids thing. That's probably the only thing that pushes it up slightly higher than Sarah and Snow, because I think to me they were interchangeable for that reason.
See, it's really, really cute up until you read the interview where someone is like, there are phones in this world, why didn't they use phones? And I think it was Tabata who said, like, we just thought that would be dumb. It didn't build tension. Just, oh God. It just
Can you imagine
it doesn't fucking work.
Could you imagine if there was a fucking Final Fantasy game that does that bullshit thing that fucking movies in the late 2010s did, where like you see they're texting and then the text pops up on the screen? You know, you must have seen that in films and shit. Can you imagine if a Final Fantasy game does that? I'm turning the fucker off, right? But one thing I will point out is that why on earth was Noctis going for Lunafrare when Gentiana was right there?
Or Aranea.
Well, Aranea was there, but I mean, Gentiana, I mean, like, she was like proper, like, look at me on the train, boy. And he's like, yeah, no, Luna, I missed my, what is wrong with you, man? Like, come on.
I will say as well, I know that we shit on Kingsglaive, and rightfully so, because it's not the best movie ever made, but Luna has fantastic chemistry with Nyx in that film. They should have been the endgame. I'm sorry, I'm saying it. I'm showing my colours here.
I can believe that, but also, sorry, Lena Headey, what the fuck were you doing in that film? I love Lena Headey, she's fantastic, but she should not have been Lunafrare.
Before this turns into a Kingsglaive hate game, then, do you want to do position... Oh no, I've already done my position 14, and so have you, so let's skip ahead. Sitting pretty at number 13, then, is Ash and Razzler.
Oh my god.
Now, don't get me wrong, I can see it, but the fact that Razzler dies before the credits have even finished rolling just means that we don't... It's very much an Elaine situation. We don't really know who Razzler is, and we see that grief perpetuated throughout the game, and we see that Ash fights for his memory, but it's not just Razzler she's fighting for. She's fighting for the reclamation of Dalmasca, for her own beliefs. Like, it's there, but it's not romantic. It could have been if he'd stayed alive, but he didn't, and that's the whole crux of 12. 12 is not a romantic game to me. But it's one of those things of like, Ash obviously cared enough for him to be that mad and continually see his ghost. And I'm using the word ghost very, very loosely here because we all know it wasn't actually, in fact, Razzler. It doesn't work for me.
For me, I mean, obviously, as famously, I've not drawn credits on 12, but I've obviously watched lots of stuff around it and, you know, story summaries and played a lot of it. I've put them at 9.
9? Wow.
Which is quite low, but also not as low as you've put them. So I think it's just because I vibe more with how he motivates her and how he is a bit more well-rounded than someone like Elaine. And I think a lot of it is influenced by the fact that I think Ash is a fantastic character.
Yes.
And how pretty much her entire story is pretty much like that reclaim the throne type thing.
Yep.
And it's reclaiming his throne. I like that her and him as a couple and as a royal couple, it doesn't seem like it's based upon her doing goodbye the king or him saving the sort of like damsel in distress. It feels like that they are a couple, and the reason she's doing it is because of them as a sort of royal couple. That's what I vibe with it. You know what I mean? I think that she's very much trying to keep his memory and what he would do alive with the way she approaches things, which I think is certainly a lot stronger than Sion and Elaine. I think for me puts it reasonably high. I think it probably falls down from being higher because of the fact that he's barely in the bloody game. But I think that it's just such a strong influence on her character, and she's such a good character that it brings it up higher. But what I do like as well in this is something we haven't quite mentioned, is that it's technically like an arranged marriage, but they make it work, and they do grow to love each other, which I think is quite an interesting...
that's not something that you see particularly often in media, and the fact that it was such a harmonious union is actually really something that should be celebrated.
I think so. So I like that. So that's put it to 9, which again is not really that high, but it's also not quite down that low.
It's better than 13, yeah.
I think we've been relatively close with some of these ones that are a bit more sidelined. So cool. So do you want to hear what my number 13 is, Mol?
Oh God, I'm terrified. I really cannot for the life of me guess what it could be. Hit me.
Clive and Jill.
Right, okay.
So Jill's a non-character. Yep. Clive is great. Talked about how I love Clive, and their relationship feels good foundations-wise because they were, again, she's the ward of whatever, and they are definitely childhood friends, going back to the Cloud and Tifa thing. But it's presented as quite one-sided. She feels like a stay-at-home wife and sacrifices more for him than he seems to for her. Yeah. Of course, at the end of the game, he goes off on his bro trip with Dion and his brother, Joshua, and sidelines her completely. Beautiful performance by Ben Starr and Susanna Fielding. And I do think the love scene is pretty tender, the beach naked scene, even though it's a bit of skin doesn't make it M-rated, as we've said. I think it's supposed it is a sex scene, but it's more tender and it's good. I like that part of it. But again, it's one of those things where it's like Jill's so underdeveloped that I don't really vibe with it that much.
It's hard to see it as a full romance when only half of the character is in it is realised fully.
I think that stay-at-home wife thing is something that sort of goes quite into it. I love Jill's design, by the way. I've said this before. I think her outfit's fantastic, but she was so underserved, and I think it knocks them down considerably. I think it's hypothetical, but I think if Jill were to have her own DLC or something that hyped her up and then had her perspective on things, it would put them up quite a bit, because I do think that Clive's motivation and love for her is put across quite well, especially at the end when he sort of says goodbye to her. I like that, but I think the act of saying goodbye to her and not taking her along sucks. So 13 for me.
So I've actually put them at position number 9. So
okay,
still in the lower half, but not as low as it could be. And again, I don't disagree with anything that you've said there. I think Jill was completely underserved, should have had far more of a character. Clive is really well realised. I just don't really buy their romance. There are 2 scenes that I can think of that worked for me. One of them was the moment very, very early on where I think they've only just reunited and it looks like they're about to kiss and then they're interrupted. I thought that was a really funny moment. That was like, brilliant. I can see exactly where this is going. I know what to expect from the rest of the game. And then there just wasn't anything else like that. You have a couple of things in the background where Clive offers her his hand, or you know that they're meant to be a couple or that they're heading towards that direction. But there was just nothing that really sealed the deal for me. Now, the beach scene, I really, really liked. I thought that was a fantastic scene. It was a great culmination to a romance, but there was nothing preceding it. There was no build-up to it. It was just, oh, by the way, they're a couple and here's this really good scene. Okay, but show me the intermediate bits. I want to believe this, which was a real shame. And I don't know if you did all of the side quests in FF16 as well.
No, because I'm not a moron.
The final quests that you can do are for your immediate entourage. So there's a quest that you can do for Dion, there's one that you can do for Joshua, and there's one that you can do for Jill. And it's all their personal stuff before you head off to the final battle. Jill's mostly centers around Joshua. I think you talk to Joshua about what kind of thing should I get for her as a present, and then it ends with you making her a flower crown and giving her a kiss. It's just,
God,
after the beach scene, I could see what they were going for, but that should have been prior. I buy it, but again, just because they've told me that this is what's happening, not because I fully believe in it.
I think it feels like they were missing some chapters. So there's the stuff when they're kids. When they reunite after the whole Ifrit and Clive thinks he's killed Joshua and then meets Sid and then you see her and he rescues her, there's not enough build-up for that to be significant.
No, which is a shame because it was a good introduction.
So if they'd had flashbacks after that and more towards how they, their tensions as kids and how they were sort of childhood romance and stuff like that told to us, we didn't see much of how that developed. We didn't see much of she didn't really go into much about specifics when they were kids. Yeah.
That entire prologue sequence is just far too short. You don't...
Totally.
You understand who they are as characters, but, that's it. It's just a setup. Yeah, it's weak, unfortunately.
Okay, my 12 might surprise you. Freya and Fratley.
We are exactly the same.
Wow, there we go.
First time for everything.
There we go. Wasted potential.
Right.
So this is kind of the opposite of Zidane and Garnet, we'll get to later, as keeping these two apart doesn't help the narrative at all. Essentially, Freya is searching for Fratley and then finds he's got amnesia, typical Final Fantasy thing, which kind of brings her story to an end mostly. There's a little bit more after that with fighting with Beatrix, which is good. But I think the issue is all the tension leaves because there's no way to come back from that easily in a story unless you make it the main focus. In the end game, he's essentially fallen in love with her without the memories, which is really cool. The fact that they're clearly soulmates or they clearly are meant for each other or whatever. I like that. But it's not pushed into the narrative at all. It's like an afterthought at the end. I think what would have fixed it, right, is if they'd subbed Fratley in for Amaranth. We had 2 summoners. We could have had 2 dragoons. We did not need a flipping monk throwing thing. If we'd had Fratley in as the extra character instead of Amaranth, that fixes Final Fantasy 9. It becomes perfect.
Interesting. I don't know if I agree with you on that, because then we'd have had Fratley moping the entire time and we'd have had someone else completely to complain about. Yeah,
but you'd have seen them, you should have seen her maybe trying to, that's the bit that's missing from the narrative. I mean, even if he doesn't in the party, the fact that if he'd been along or he'd been ahead of them on their journey or something like that, where you could see them interacting and her trying to convince him of memories and stuff like that, that would have been better. I
completely agree with that. Fratley is unfortunately very underutilized. The fact that you only really see him in one scene, and it's a very maybe this is ironic to say, but I find it a very forgetful scene. Like, it's very easily overshadowed by so much else that's going on in the game at that point. And I don't know, I get the only real note that I've got for Freya and Fratley is that I wish that we got more resolution for them. And I know that we have that resolution at the end of the game, but it's not enough. You know, it could be very much another story on top of everything else that 9 gives us.
Yeah.
But I believe the heartbreak, I believe the grief at forgetting and being forgotten. It's just not forefront enough to matter. And like you said, after you find Fratley in the game, that's Freya's arc mostly resolved, and she's not really seen to again in the game, which is such a shame because she's a fantastic character. We should have continually had more for her, but unfortunately, no, we found your boyf. He's good. Get on now, you know.
It's a really weird, because obviously her story is centered upon like her kingdom being destroyed and stuff like that. And the scene where Fratley arrives and you say it's forgettable, what I think adds to that is that Fratley appears, and my memory of that, certainly when I first played the game, there's a lot of power scaling stuff going on in Final Fantasy IX. Like very anime in terms of like, these characters are more powerful than you, and then as you travel through the game, you become more powerful than they are, kind of thing. So obviously Beatrix curb stomps you 3 times. And I think the idea is that you then become more powerful than Beatrix. And you see that through Steiner. You don't see that through Freya, and she never really avenges her kind of like, you know, her race or whatever. But with the link to Fratley there is obviously like Fratley comes along and saves the day. He helps you, so he kind of like is shown in the narrative as being far more powerful than you are. He's like a benchmark for someone you want to get to, and the fact you never get to play with him or you never get to really see that again, it kind of makes him redundant. Whereas with Beatrix, you see that you can see people bettering her, so it makes her involvement in the narrative much stronger.
That's a really good point, actually. As you were saying that as well, all I could think of was, I can't even really say in good faith that it's a shame that Freya's story revolves around Fratley, because at first glance it does, but ultimately Freya actually has so much more going for her than just Fratley, which I really, really appreciate in a romance story. Like, Freya is very much a fully rounded individual, and she has her own wants and dislikes and things that she's fighting for that isn't just a lover.
And I think the thing is as well is that, I mean, maybe they thought that, and maybe they thought, hang on a minute, how do we write someone, you know, we haven't got a damsel in distress here, so how do we do this? I mean, obviously there are ways to do it, but it would really been quite difficult with all the other focus they had on different characters. I think personally, I mean, I just said there about having Fratley in the party, but another way they could have done it is obviously we've got the story of him having amnesia. He could have effectively become duped by Kuja or all the villains, and Freya should have to convince him. That would have been fucking fantastic.
I'm loving this vision, actually.
They had a situation where, like, he's been told, this is what's going on, because he doesn't trust anyone, because he doesn't know anything. He just goes along with it.
Fanfic authors take notes.
She's got to convince him, and that becomes the path of, like, he never remembers her, but because of her relationship with him, she knows him, and she brings him back. That would have been fucking brilliant. But, hey-ho, it wasn't to be.
Real shame.
So... yes, real shame. So that's my position 12.
Wonderful, and mine as well. So let's go right on to position number 11. Now, I think I'm going to shock you with this one. My position 11's Locke and Selly's.
Oh my god! What have you done? You know where this is for me, don't you?
I don't know, Locke and Selly's, it's one of those things that, again, I have to squint to see it, but I can see it. It's just not for me. I think they could both do better, personally.
Wow. Number 1 for me.
Yeah, thought so.
Thanks, Mol. Just your revenge for Final Fantasy VII, isn't it?
It is. Everything is a revenge for that.
So I think, right, both of them have got believable doubts. They also both really make each other better people. I really could vibe with that. And it's really about their journey as an actual well-built relationship. So the game builds the foundation as opposed to, let's show them together. They also challenge each other really well. And I think it's the most real in that sense. It seems, to me, the best written from that perspective.
That's completely fair. I just don't personally really read it that way. I think for me, 6 isn't a love story, and it feels like an unnecessary add-on to the overall everything else that's going on.
I guess it's one of those things where I think because they don't show them sort of holding hands or kissing, or there isn't that big romantic moment, you could argue that takes away from it as them as couple, but I think that they have their conflict early on, and their conflict drives towards them becoming better people. Creates a good foundation for a relationship, I would argue.
I think they have fantastic chemistry, is potentially the wrong word to use in this situation, but I think they have a really good base of talking to each other. The fact that, Selly's obviously takes a really long time to open up to Locke, and then she later uses his bandana in the faux suicide scene to be moved to better herself and go into the world. I think that's fantastic. It's just not built up enough for me, and it's not romantic enough for me to really believe it.
Yeah, I think there's as well the fact that a lot of that stuff is optional at the end. The fact that Locke is an optional character kind of means that you can kind of customize it a little bit. I think that the dynamic of Locke's got that sort of, he's got his issues with the fact that he feels like he's let Rachel down, so he wants to rescue the damsel in distress type. I think the reason that it works for me is that she turns around and she's like, yeah, fuck off. I'm not going to behave like that. But that doesn't deter him. He doesn't then double down and go, no, I'm going to treat you this way. It directly influences his perspective on things,
Yeah, that's completely fair.
I think that if you didn't have Sellers there challenging him like that, and everything still turned out the way it did, and he then found the Phoenix Cave and then met Rachel again, I think that she would have forgiven him, and then he would have had nothing to, he would have been like, what am I going on? I think the fact, you could argue that Sellers' act really saves Locke, and his act really saves her. That's reason it vibes for me. I think it's because it's understated that I like it.
That's completely fair. Everyone's entitled to be wrong, Jack.
So that means I get to go next.
Yes, what's your number 11?
Let's see if I can upset you. My number 11 is Edward and Anna.
Okay.
Anna is a pretty non-entity in FF4, but Edward and Teller obviously are a big part of it, especially the Spoony Bard stuff. Yeah. It's another one of those only one character is developed. The only real big impact is Anna's death has an impact on Teller and of course Edward as well. I think the reason it's higher than some of the other ones that the vibe this way is because of its impact on the game and the game's story, and the fact that game is based around love with a theme of love and stuff like that. That's really all I got to say about it because it's quite dry.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. They came in at number 10 for me.
Yeah.
It's just a case of they are exactly what it says on the tin. I see the love, I see the grief. To me, it's kind of exactly the same as Cyan and Elaine. I can see exactly where they were going for it. It's very character establishing. I just happen to like Edward a lot more as a character than I like Cyan. That's it. That's the whole reason they're higher.
That does help as well. I mean, fucking hell, imagine if you like Edward more than someone. He must be a dick.
Nothing more really to say on that one. So what's your number 10, Jack?
My number 10 is Dion and Terence.
Wow, okay.
So I would argue that this is the best romance in Final Fantasy 16, which is why I've put it above Clive and Jill. So obviously Sir Terence is a minor character, but he actually has a character. Yeah. And the fact that he becomes Dion's squire and confesses his feelings is a pretty cool motivation. You can see the drive for what he's done. Yeah. Obviously, there's a genuine love here. You can see it through the performances and the direction. But the story doesn't have a well-resolved ending for them, a bit like Final Fantasy 16 in general. So that's why it's lower, but I buy it. I think that, Dion's motivation for parts where he's worried in the story when the battle's going off and he sends Sir Terence away, and Sir Terence is like, hang on, mate, I'm a squire. Like, why are you sending me away? That's really believable romance to me. Yeah, again, it's not good enough because it's lack of resolution stops it being higher, but I think it's definitely the best in 16.
That's fair. Can I just say as an aside note, I think it's really adorable that you keep calling him Sir Terence. Like, do not forget that man's epithet.
Sir Terence. Definitely call him Sir Terence. It sounds so cool. He needs some respect. He's pushed himself to get what he wants. Brilliant bloke.
And what he wants is Dion. For me, and I'm sure this will come at no surprise to you, Dion and Terence actually come in at number 2.
Wow, okay. I thought it would be quite high, but I didn't realise. Well, so technically I've stitched you up by being nice.
A little bit,
weird.
Yeah. No, I think they're a fantastic couple. I don't think they are perfect. For Square Enix, for Final Fantasy's first official gay couple, and I think when we were originally talking about our overall shortlist, we left out the concept of Fang and Vanille, and a lot of people will argue that Fang and Vanille were the OG gay couple, but they are not confirmed. This is just one of those things that has a lot of evidence and a lot of people really touting them as the first, but they are not the first canon gay couple. That would go to Dion and Terence. I think what they gave us was very heartfelt. When I first heard that 16 was getting sanctioned and banned in, I think it was the UAE and a couple of other countries as well, for having gay content, my hopes were raised, but only slightly. I didn't want to get my hopes up too much because I really, really didn't know what they were going to do. It could have been anything. And then they gave us something that was just so achingly sincere that I believed from moment one. I don't know, it really, really lifted my heart. And then to see Dion as a fully realised character and to not have the gayness be at the forefront. It is just a part of his character. It is a part of Terence's character. And nothing else matters. They could have been anybody else. Like, it's just very, very beautiful to me. I agree with you in the fact that the resolution is not necessarily resolved, shall we say, but like you say, that's kind of just a fault of 16 as a whole.
Yeah.
I think the real problem that I have with it is that Terrence is not his own character. Terrence could have been anybody else. He is a building block for Dion. Unfortunately, in doing that, they've actually given a building block character more characterization than Jill, which is just insane.
That's what I mean, yeah.
But Terrence could have been anyone. He didn't have to be this particular character. I don't know. I just like them. I think they're nice.
I think I slightly disagree on that. I mean, obviously, I think we are agreeing, is I don't think Terrence has much going for him in terms of a dynamic, motivated character, but I do like that his character is essentially driven to get what he wants by becoming a squire. And I like that for me. But so I agree, but they could have made anyone be like that. Yeah. I think you're right, is what you're saying. But yeah, and I think as well, what I liked is that it wasn't obviously the gay part of it. I don't think it was mentioned at all in the story. It was just accepted that was who he loved and who he went out with or whatever. There was it wasn't written into the world of the game that anyone would have an issue with that, like some people would, unfortunately, in our world. And I think that helped a lot.
Yeah. I think official side materials actually mentioned that the reason that Dion keeps his relationship secret isn't because he expects like homophobic backlash, it's because it's fraternization within his troops, which I thought was a fantastic, like, okay, yeah, that's an aside and it's not in the actual base game itself, but like seeing that, wonderful, love it, perfect. Honestly, I think my main issue and the reason why they're not at number one is because I think ultimately that Dion and Joshua had better chemistry, but that's just me.
Which is why he sends Terrence off and why he hangs around with Joshua and Clive at the end of the game.
No, Clive's just there to be a cock block.
Yeah, well, that's what he does a lot, isn't it? He comes along, blocks your cock and steals your powers. Okay, so we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back in a couple of minutes to talk about the rest of these lovely couples. Okay, so welcome back after that little break we've just had. We are on position 8 of our top Final Fantasy couples list. I've already done my position 8 because it's Cloud and Tifa. Would you like to reveal your position 8?
I would love to. My position number 8 is Zidane and Garnet.
Oh, God.
And I'm not doing this to spite you. I know you might think that. I think this is kind of coming just to an overall common theme with a lot of these couples. I just didn't really feel very strongly about it. Again, it's kind of an expected, especially at this point in the franchise's lifetime, of there's going to be a romance and it's going to be the lead guy and it's going to be the lead girl. It's fine. I can live with that. It's whatever. I can see it coming from a mile away. I don't necessarily think that they're incompatible or that the build-up is bad. I just don't care.
Oh my God, you soulless person.
Yeah, that's me.
It is a classic star-crossed lovers story. He's a commoner and she's a princess. Turns out he's actually an alien and she's a summoner.
Taylor's old as time, that one.
Taylor's old as time, yeah. No, she's more of a commoner, he's more of a royalty in a weird way, which I liked. Always vibe with that. The way the conflict is told through them splitting up is really good. So, like, the fact that they are, he's trying it on with her at the beginning. And, of course, there's a little bit of... He makes a comment about taking her on an airship cruise and it's actually someone else he's asked. And she is genuinely jealous. I like that. It's not completely one-sided that he's just trying to get in her pants, from want of a better term, and then she's like, no, go away, stupid commoner. I do love when they split up, all the time you see her thinking about him and talking about him. She's complaining about how much of a dick he is. And he's like... oh, I miss Garnet. I love her so much. She's fantastic. But then I'd love that they kind of do a bit of a bait and switch with that, because like his focus for the entire game is her. And then right at the end, he goes, you know what? The right thing to do is go and save my brother. Fuck you. See you later. And she's like, well, no, wait, what? I think that is so realistic, that part of it. I mean, the rest of it is fantastical and everything like that. And it is, like you say, by the book in a lot of ways. But I do love that they did that, how she's like, oh, whatever, yeah, fine, because he's chasing her. And as soon as he shows some interest in something else, she's like, no, what about me?
Like, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of individual elements that I actually really enjoy. I don't think it's a bad romance overall. I think just I've talked about this before, the characters of 9 just fall a little flat for me overall, and I think that builds into it. You're shaking your head. I'm sorry, man, tell it like I see it. The moment that really... actually comes to mind when I think of Zidane and Garnet isn't even a romantic moment. It's in Mayday and Sari when Zidane's telling her the story of Ibsen and Colin.
Oh.
That's such a good scene. I love the way that their relationship is highlighted, of like they're on a completely equal path, they're both lost in the world, and they're just trying to find some commonality. I really loved that scene.
Why did you come with me? Because I wanted to.
Yes.
Yeah, fucking excellent. And also, just before that scene, Eiko, whatever you want to call her, is going, is Garnet or is Daggy your girlfriend? And she goes, are you more than friends? And he goes, yes, we are. We're a team. And I use that in like everyday language with people. Yes, we're a team. Like I love that. And I think what you just said there, though, a lot of that doesn't necessarily tie into the romance, it just ties into the friendship side of things. But I'm sorry, bring my beloved dagger to me just trumps everything for me. That is magic. That moment where he throws the flipping cloak off and surprises her, and she's like, oh my god, I'm sorry. Simple flipping teenage boy watching that. Heart overhead, but it is Valentine's Day, so I will be saying that. Number 3 for me.
3. Wow, I was expecting that to be number 1, actually. Genuinely surprised. I will say the only other note that I actually have on this is that I think Garnet should have ended up with Beatrix. Princess and Knight. It's a fucking tale as old as time. It would have worked.
Now that would be exciting for different reasons.
Okay, Jack. Right, number 7 then. I've already done mine. That was Sarah and Snow. So who's your position number 7?
Laguna and Rain are at number 7.
Okay.
I bet you're surprised this is quite low for me.
I am, actually, considering how hard you pushed for this one to be.
But they have to be represented, right? Like, I don't necessarily need to be number 1. They had to be represented. I mean, I realised I would have lost if I'd put this at number 1. Then, and the fact that you didn't even shortlist it would have been some interesting tension. So Rain and Laguna I think are great. Rain really changes Laguna. I remember personally thinking the relationship was kind of mature and a bit strange for me when I first played it, bearing in mind I think I was 9 or 10. So,
and as an adult, how has your opinion changed?
So essentially, like, when I remember watching it, she's complaining about him. And of course, when I'm a kid, kids are quite honest. So I thought, well, she doesn't like him. But then, of course, like, it's her fighting with her feelings because she wants him to stay. And he's, like, naturally someone that wants to go off on an adventure. And I really get the impression that Rain changes him quite a bit. But I also get the impression that he changes her quite a bit. You know, she's an outlier in the village. If you go back to Win Hill, which is optional later in the game, you kind of see what's implied to be Rain's ghost.
Yeah.
But I think the implication there is, a spoiler alert, Squall is Rain and Laguna's child. So I think the implication there is that you go back to Win Hill and you see Rain in the pub. I think it's Squall's memory. But I think that's the important thing that they're kind of going for there. Again, with Final Fantasy and a lot of good stuff about it, it is open to interpretation. But my whole argument about Laguna and Rain being on the list, and the reason I wanted them to at least be on the shortlist, is that in a weird way, they're the best parents in Final Fantasy.
One's dead and one's absent. Best parents.
Well, yeah. I mean, like, that's why I said in a weird way. It kind of goes beyond the realms of the list, and I just wanted to represent some parents here, because they're the really only ones that are a decent couple, I think, as far to say. And because they are both absent through death or lack of awareness, because Laguna's an absentee father from lack of knowing more than anything. It's not just a flipping deadbeat dad. But the way that they essentially allow their children to... The example they set for their children, which is amplified by the fact that Alone sends you back to look at Laguna's life, it leads to the characters being the way they are. And I think if they hadn't have had the war splitting them up, then they still would have been great parents, and it wouldn't really have ended up much different for the characters.
Yeah, I can see
they
that.
probably would have had an easier childhood and not been as stressed out. But I think the example was set, and again amplified by the fact that you can go back and watch it if you use Alone's special powers. But I think that's tantamount, is that the right word, to their characters and their personalities. Very, very real, very guttural as well. They are, I believe, them changing each other, because he's naturally an explorer, she's naturally a home person, and they sort of reel each other in there. And it would have been interesting if there'd been no war, or whether they'd gone travelling together, and it would have been an interesting vibe. Yeah,
that's actually a really good way of looking at it. Like you, I think when I was a lot younger and playing it for the first time, what the fuck is wrong with these people? She's complaining and he doesn't seem to know his arse from his head. Like, what's going on here?
That's true.
Well, yeah. But as I've gotten older, sure, we don't see an awful lot of them. It's just that one flashback scene that we really see them for at the beginning of Disc 2.
Don't forget the ending.
The ending as well. But, like, we can see from just that one very, very short scene overall that they both really, really cared, like, very, very deeply. And sure, Rain complains, but also I would fucking complain if I was taking care of Laguna. Like, especially if he snores and talks in his sleep. It's like, motherfucker, I would kill you dead. Like you, I think as an adult, I've gained a definite appreciation for them, and I've never really considered what life would have been like had Rain survived and had they stayed together. I'll have to put more thought into that in the future, actually. For me, my main note on them is actually very similar to the note that I had with Sarah and Snow. I feel the love more keenly because of the absence of one of them, or both of them in this case. Sure, you don't really know about any of this until you actually, like, properly meet Laguna more and understand his motivations, but because you know that Rain isn't there. You only see her in this one scene, and then later on you find out that she died essentially in childbirth. I don't know, something about that just really compelled me to feel like this is even more realistic than anything else that's going on. Like, sometimes bad things just happen and there's no getting away from it, but the love is still there. You can lose people, you can fall out with people, but the love is still there. And yeah, for that reason, I've actually ranked them higher than you. I've put them at number 6.
Oh my god, that's interesting. See, I know convincing you to shortlist them is a good thing, but I will just jump in and say, the fact you just compared Laguna and Rain to fucking Snow is just, what the
Not
fuck
in personality,
is
I want to make that deadly clear.
Well, they're both goofballs, but fucking Snow, honestly, like, you just have to, like, basically, like...
Can you imagine Laguna with a mullet? If I just ruined your day.
Can you just shrink Snow down to be a normal-sized man, basically, with long hair? I mean, there's loads to talk about here, but we love Final Fantasy VIII, as everyone's probably realised by now. I think it was Will Alleyway Jack that mentioned in one of his episodes about the Laguna Dream segments. And he talks about the one where Laguna's fighting the dragon and how that kind of feels very out of place until you realise that the movie does with the Gunblade is the movie that Sifa's watched to grow up and stuff like that. But I always thought when I was growing up that the dream that felt out of place was the one where you go back to Windhill, because I was like, what the fuck's this about? Like, there's no battling and whatever. But then when you get older and you realise how significant that particular moment in the game is, and how that ties everything together, and how that's basically like in a linear story, that would be the first scene of the game. I think it's just, fucking cool. Again, I'm arguing for something being fucking cool, but putting it relative in the middle, smack back in the little list. But I think the reason that I wanted it to be on the shortlist is because it represents that parental impact on the series.
I think another reason that I don't overlook it, but it's definitely something that I've never really given a huge amount of consideration to before, is it's almost very fairy tale in a sense of, we know that Windhill is surrounded by war. I mean, there's bullet holes all over the walls of Alone's house, and we know that she was orphaned from a very young age. It's a very, very bleak place. And ultimately what happens is that Laguna was fighting in that war, and he gives up his soldiership because he loves this woman. Like, he changes his entire life because of a chance encounter, which is just so magical. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. So...
and realistic, changing your whole life because of a chance encounter with some guy and making a podcast with him.
Never had that happen to me before. No, I can't rank them any higher because we don't see any more of them. But I know if we did, they would have been in my mind for a lot longer.
That ending scene where she smiles at him when he goes, oh my god, when he goes to run away because he's nervous, and she just turns around and just smiles at him, oh my god. I mean, I'm fucking sorry, that jumper she wears is the fucking cutest thing in the fucking world. You gotta say, she rocks that flipping jumper.
Does.
It is
for such a simple, normal outfit, it fits in the world of 8 as well, which is insane.
We could talk about this all day, but we're gonna move on.
Yes. What's your number 6, if they're mine?
My number 6 is Zack and Aerith. Right. Okay. So I think this is actually a really well-developed relationship. I think it's the only good thing about... No, it's not the only good thing about Crisis Core. It's the best thing about Crisis Core, which is a game that has serious fucking problems.
Oh boy, does it.
But I do like how natural they feel in the game. I love how he just meets her in the same place that Cloud meets her later. That's the poetic side of things. I think it's supposed to be the same place, isn't
exactly
it?
The same place,
it's the same way. Yeah. But she kind of nurses Zack to health a bit more than she does with Cloud. Cloud, he gets up, and I think that there's a bit more nursing of Zack because he's been injured. To me, it just feels so natural. Like, he meets her, they just sort of like, oh, you're my girlfriend. Like, do you want to text me later? That's really refreshing to me. And it's sort of carefree until ultimately it ends in tragedy for both of them. There's obviously that scene that I know you really like in Advent Children, and I also like it as well, right at the end with the pair of them together.
It's going to make me cry, man. Just thinking about it setting me off.
Yeah, well, you just talked about fucking Laguna and Rain, and I didn't cry. So, obviously, it ultimately ends in tragedy for both of them, but of course they get the resolution in Advent Children, which is the best part of Advent Children. And of course, Zack's story and influence on the FF7 world is pretty much told through Aerith. Yeah. I mean, like, if you play the original game, like, you only really see Zack. Is Zack optional to see at all? I
completely.
mean, yeah, so it's that scene where you go into flipping...
the Shinra Mansion. You
go back into the Shinra Mansion and you see that scene with the Sonic the Hedgehog looking Zack.
God, he is very spiky, isn't he?
Is there a scene in Gongaga as well where you can see him, a flashback or something?
No, the only other time that we actually see him would be when Tifa's looking at the photograph.
That'll be it, that's the one. So yeah, I mean, like, for someone that isn't really... I mean, it's a weird one with Final Fantasy VII because, of course, the compilation came out, again, quite a long time after 7, but our memories have now been tainted by that, and asking all those questions about, you know, Zack and Aerith and Cloud and stuff like that. And obviously with Rebirth and Remake, Zack has made a much bigger statement of as an actual character and a personality and stuff like that. But I just think that the fact that he is essentially the most important character in the game in a way that is never in the narrative, really. But his relationship with Aerith brings him into it.
Yeah.
And that's why it's at 6 for me and not higher, because, again, the fact that in the original game it's not that well told and they're really not that dynamic a couple. They're just a nice little romance, I think, is the reason it's in the middle somewhere.
That's completely fair. So for me, they actually come in at number 1. They are my favourite.
I'm not surprised.
I thought you would think that. I would like to know why you think that I put them at number 1. I'd like to know what you think my reasoning was.
Well, it can't be because of flowers, because you were dissing flipping Clive and Stuff's flowers and shit like that.
Honestly, I had a really, really hard time narrowing down my top 3. Obviously, Dion and Terrence are my number 2. I wanted to rank them as high as I could, but I wanted to be fair about it, and I really, really struggled. And thinking about it, I couldn't really put down any single solid point for why I think Zack and Aerith are the best couple on this list. I am 100% sure, in no small part, that a lot of it is to do with nostalgia. Like you said, the compilation and everything being so long ago has really muddied the waters, and knowing that all of these feelings have been going around for so fucking long at this point. It's been nearly 30 years, for fuck's sakes. Like, I'm sure that nostalgia is tainting my opinions here, but as far as the original game goes, I think, again, not seeing Zack for the majority of it, and it only being an optional sequence that you see him talk about going back to Midgar, and a single throwaway line of, I know somewhere, wait, the mother still lives there, maybe not. And not knowing, but having an inkling, like, that's just a really nice way of, like, is this the same? Did they know? It must have been the same. And drawing that line, really, really fantastic storytelling, I think. And then getting to see that come to life in Advent Children at the end, which I sobbed my little heart out to in 2005. And then again in Crisis Core when that came out. Now, I know a lot of people who did not like Crisis Core, and I know a lot of people who really did not like Zack, and I think you might be one of them, Jack.
No, I've been winding you up by texting you occasionally, just for the listeners' benefit. I've been occasionally messaging Mol saying Zack's a dick, because I know that it winds them up, and it's funny. That's literally the only reason. And I was just getting the punches in before I was stitched up with this list, because I knew what was going to happen. No, I think I alluded to the fact that I prefer Zack's original voice actor in the original Crisis Core game, so just something for everyone's benefit, and maybe yours, Mol, as well. Obviously, my relationship with 7 is very different than lots of people. I did play Midgar several times as a kid, around the same time I played 8 and 9, but I didn't finish it really until a couple of years ago. But, you know, obviously the fact that the game's so impactful and everyone knows everything that happens in that fucking game means that I'm obviously part of it and everything like that. So my absorption, shall we say, of the story and you know, like all the different constituent parts has been a little bit different. But I did play Crisis Core quite a lot on the PSP when I was younger. Right. So that was kind of my link in with the series. So I have a bit of a soft spot for Crisis Core, as much as it pisses me off. See, with Crisis Core Reunion coming out a couple of years ago and replaying that, all I could think the entire time through was, this game fucking sucks, actually. It's stupid, it fucks up the timeline, it's unnecessary, and yet I love it. And one of my biggest issues with Crisis Core is the characterization that it foists upon Aerith, because she is vastly different as a character to the way that she is in the original game and then in Remake. And I'm really glad that they kept her being spunky in Remake and Rebirth, actually, rather than reducing her to just say, yeah. And I get it, because she's a 17-year-old, she's going through some shit, and she's right to be scared. She lives in the slums, she's being tailed by the Turks, even if she's used to it at that point in her life. I don't like the Aerith of Crisis Core, but I can really see the development of her relationship with Zack as a very, very natural thing, to the point where, after playing Crisis Core, going back and replaying the original game, knowing that this is something that was done in retrospect, this wasn't ever something that was done with the original intent in mind, seeing how much of Zack's personality is in Aerith in that original game is like, oh, she loved him enough to house him in a way that you only do when you really genuinely love people. Like, the amount of friends that I've had over the years who have had specific mannerisms or specific turns of phrase, and I know I've picked them up over the years, I'm sure it's something that everyone does. The more you speak to
someone, the more you tend to mirror them. It's just a kind of simple fact of life. And seeing that happen with Aerith and Zack was just like, oh, I get it. This is what it is.
Yeah, really, really good. So Brianna White as well.
Yes.
As Aerith. That's a whole nother episode. Fantastic performance.
And I know you didn't like Caleb Pierce as Zack. He did grow on me eventually.
I'm just going to say it out there because I don't dislike. I'm not a hater or anything like that of Caleb Pierce, but I just don't think that.
He's no Ricky Gomez.
No. I just think that again, that's a nostalgia thing because I did play Crisis Core quite a lot when I was younger, and I vibe for the PSP game. One thing I will say about Crisis Core, we'll get to that at some point in detail, is it's just so, even when you put a fantastic lick of paint on it on PS4, it's still so obviously a fucking PSP game. Yeah. It's the same as Type Zero. Fuck
I'm
me,
dreading
we'll
that
get to that. We've just alienated at least one person. Hey. I think you've just summed up a bit better than me, but like I said about how Zack's story is told through Aerith, I think what might explain the different characterization of Aerith in Crisis Core is that essentially you're seeing it from Zack's perspective.
Yeah, that is the other thing as well. I know Seven's, all the stories surrounding the Nibelheim incident and everything to do with Zack, every single piece of media is told from a different perspective. You're not being given the full story no matter where you're looking at it, so I completely get that.
And I think they're great. I mean, I can understand why you've put them at number one. There's better ones for me.
It's my heart pick, Jack, and it's Heart Day.
It is Heart Day, and you've stabbed my heart by putting Sellers and flipping Locklow. So, I make no.
Well, let's move swiftly on then. I think we're at position number 5 now. Neither of us have actually said our position 5s. Let's have you go.
Cecil and Rosa are number 5.
Respectable.
Love these guys. Classic couple. Obviously, Cecil does a lot to save Rosa from being, in a coma or whatever. And of course, there's a big narrative part of the game where you've got to go and wake her up. But Rose is also badass herself. Yeah. The dynamic between the two of them is really good. She's a damsel in distress, but then she's on equal footing with him. There's not really much to say here. They're a classic couple. They're great together. Theme of love is absolute fucking fire. Wells me up every time I hear it. And it's really respectably written for the first real couple in the series. Yes. I think it's just great. And it's the benchmark for everything else, as Final Fantasy IV is in a lot of ways. So
yeah, no, completely agree. They're a textbook fantasy fairy tale. Kind of can't help but love it. Again, there's probably a lot of nostalgia playing into this, but I can't really help that. I'm sorry, guys. I've put them at position number 3, and honestly, I really wrestled with who was going to go in number 1, if it was going to be Cecil and Rosa or Zack and Aerith. That's kind of the way that I view both of these things. They're almost interchangeable with just how much they get to me. Overall, Zack and Aerith wins out, I think, just because I love 7 a little bit more than I love 4.
Yeah.
But
no, we know that.
But Cecil and Rosa are just, they're the epitome of what you want from a romance, really. Like, on both sides, you want to be cared for by someone that really believes that you're a good person, and you want to know that the other half of your heart is going to be looking out for your best interests no matter what. And, maybe there's a brooding dude on the sidelines, but nothing can come between you two. Like, they're just perfect, really. I'm sorry, I say it like it is. Also, who wouldn't want Cecil Harvey in their lives?
Can't disagree with anything you've said. It would be an interesting twist if Kane was into Cecil more, though, wouldn't it?
Oh, they're a throuple. 100% they should have been a throuple.
Yeah, maybe that's what he was vibing for, and they were like, mate, go away, seriously. I don't like dragoons, go away.
We need the After Years number 2, where that becomes reality.
Yeah, the After Hours.
Yes, so my number 5 is Tidus and Yuna. I think that they're good enough that they hit the top 5. It's slow. It's relatively realistic for a very unrealistic world. I think that the struggles that they both go through that have nothing to do with each other are solid enough that it makes me believe in them more, both as characters and their relationship. I don't know, there's something about it that just... It took me a while to really get it, but once it clicked, it clicked. Having said that, the scene in Macalania, I'm really sorry to say this, it was cringe as fuck. I don't like that scene.
Ooh, well, number 2 for me.
Wow, okay.
And that's just the first time we'd strongly disagree with something, because I think we're probably the same on most things here. But Final Fantasy X, we've said our interpretation is that it's Yuna's story, and it's essentially Tidus as the viewer's sort of viewing glass, I guess you could say. What I love is that they've got like a shared history, because she's like the only person to believe that he's from Zanarkand without reservation, and there's no hesitation there, which is so refreshing, especially because you've been living life through him for the last however many days or whatever, and everyone else is like, what the fuck are you talking about? And you've had to go, oh god, and lie to everyone, and she's like, no, I believe you. And that's such a good moment, and it sort of bonds them instantly. And they don't give up on each other the whole game. So, of course, there's a bit towards the end of the game where she creates the most emotional part of the game for me, where she records the sphere recording, like basically her own eulogy, and he throws it away, and he's like, "Oh, fuck that, fuck destiny," like that's the kind of vibe of their relationship. Obviously, there's the scene where he learns that her destiny is to die. And he essentially goes, no, that's not happening, and does everything he can to stop it happening. And of course, that leads her to then eventually go, hang on a minute, maybe I don't have to do this, which leads to the climax of Final Fantasy X, where, plot twist, it's Auron's plan all along to get them to come to that realization themselves. And I think it's fucking great, that. I think it's really, really cool. I really like the lake scene. I'm sorry. I think it vibes with me.
Honestly, considering that it's held up as one of, it's the scene that, you think, you ask anybody to imagine an FMV from Final Fantasy, and chances are Macalania Lake's probably going to be up there. I don't know what it is, just the FMV itself is fine. It's the proceeding that really gets to me. If I'm trying to have a little alone moment and I'm bawling my eyes out and some, the last thing I want is some jock dude, trying to make out with me,
That's on Tidus. If it was, I don't know,
Okay, well, who's singing in the background then?
If Beatrix was in the lake with you, then you'd be fine with it, is what you're saying.
I wonder why either of us was in a lake at that point. Actually, no, I probably wouldn't, but...
No, hang on. No, I'm thinking too much. No, it's not that. So basically, someone needs to, make a mod of that game with different characters in it, is what you're saying. I think I get what you're saying. I think I'm obviously, I've only really rolled credits on this game more recently as well. I don't think it's as romantic as Bring My Beloved Dagger to Me, which we've talked about before. But I don't know. I just think that the writing of how their romance really is tied in with the narrative of the story, and it leads things. It pushes the plot forward in a way that the other games don't really. I mean, other ones do, but this one I think does it the best out of all of them, in my opinion. And I just think that number 2 is the perfect spot for these two.
Yeah, I think that's completely fair. Again, you can see it coming from a mile away. They're both the lead characters of their respective genders. You know what's going to happen. I know what's going to happen. Everyone knows what's going to happen. One thing that I didn't take into consideration, actually, was 10-2 when I was ranking these. I don't know if 10-2 changes the way that I feel about them or not. What about you?
See, 10-2 is a weird one because, a lot of the stuff with them is optional. You'd have to, beat the game 50 billion times to get it. Spoiler alert, for the end of 10-2, if you get the true ending or whatever, he comes back. Yeah. I don't really know what I feel about that either.
Yeah, it's one of those, I get it, it's an optional ending, and I get that it's the ideal for Yuna, not necessarily the player, but how I feel about it is but did we have to, though?
No, I mean, it would have been better if you'd had something from Tidus's perspective. He just turns up, he's like, well, I'm back now, lol. It's well, where's his character in that?
Yeah.
We've rescued this object, And I mean, in some instances, we've talked about other characters on the list that are a bit like that, and it's just a bit of a weird twist that it's, I don't know if it's a healthy twist, that it's the bloke as opposed to the woman. I think it doesn't make it any better.
Twist. We'll leave it at that.
I think it's good. Number 2 for me. So that means that...
The only one that we really have to look at now is number 4, because we've gone through our 3, 2, and 1 individually.
Well, we know what number 4 is, don't we?
Has to be Squall and Renoa.
It does, doesn't it? And we're both at number 4.
Yes. I'm surprised that this one wasn't at number 3 or 2 for you.
Okay, I guess I'm taking Renoa with me is one of the best fucking lines in Final Fantasy. But most of that is because of Squall and his journey, right? We talked about this relationship a lot when we had May on the podcast, and how what's cool about it is how real it is.
Yes.
And how the characters start off hating each other. They have completely different worldviews, completely different backgrounds, but their relationship is really real. A lot of people say that it's clumsy and not realistic. I think it's clumsy and is therefore realistic. It's uncomfortable and awkward, but that's what life's like as a teenager, folks, you know? And also, I think she's a bit more into him, and then when she goes into a coma, he then gets more into her, and he's driven to save her, and, of course, he jumps into space to save her. Fucking one of the best moments ever. And then the aforementioned I'm taking Renoa with me. And I think what puts them at 4, because it is a high position, just to justify a high position, is the fact that what I like that they do here is that she rescues him at the end of the game. They don't just have her rescue the damsel in distress. She balances it out by saving him at the end, which balances it out. It's great. Eyes on Me is fucking fire, fantastic. But I think the reason they're not number 1 and they're number 4 and a bit further down is there is a little bit more from Squall's perspective. So, for example, with the Eyes on Me bit, when he realises she's a sorceress, when he hears the guys over the tannoy, and there's that moment when he looks at her, and you can see, with the whole direction, he's like, I've got to make a decision here that I don't want to make. But that's more about his character. So I think a lot of the stuff with Renoa is in CGI cutscenes. So, for example, the bit where Squall's hitting the chest with the ice shard at the parade. You see her being shocked at her end, and like you see the beautifully animated putting her arm down, and she's scared for him. There's also the scene where right at the end where she rescues him, and you see her perspective. You get less of the decision-making process to save Squall, the decision-making process and how she views Squall. You don't see much of because of the way the story in Final Fantasy VIII is told. You see a lot more of that from Squall's perspective, which I think stops it being number one. If we had more from Rinoa's perspective, I think it would put it to number one. That's my vibe.
It's interesting because this is one that I've actually had arguments with people over the years, and it has been years, about whether or not it's a realistic romance. And I really, really think it is. I know a lot of people
guttural, yeah,
really, really don't like it because they think it's just not real. They don't like Rinoa. They don't like Squall. Myriad reasons, honestly. But yeah, like you said, being a teenager isn't easy. It's clumsy. It's awkward. You fuck up all the goddamn time. Like, that's kind of just part and parcel of being in your teens. And I really think that Squall and Rinoa epitomise that beautifully in a way that, and I know I've spoken about this before, but like, I think that they end up rubbing off on each other so well that they start picking up each other's habits. And, you see Rinoa become slightly more introverted and more thoughtful, and you see Squall throw caution to the wind a little bit more often. He doesn't necessarily become as perky as Rinoa was in the very beginning, but like, that's not who they are. They change while still staying true to their characters. And I just absolutely love that. Again, it's the whole, one person in a position of elevated power and the knight that protects them. I'm a fucking sucker for that. What can I say? It's a really good trope. And I think that they do a really good job of not going overboard with it here. They very easily could have, but they don't. And I think that the fact that it ends on... You can tell that they end up becoming a couple by the end of the game, and that's fine, but it still feels very open. Like, these are still teenagers at the end of the day with this chapter closed. They have the whole rest of their lives ahead of them now, and it could go anywhere, and I love that just as a closing off.
So you mentioned they pick up each other's habits. I take it she plays card games a lot more now.
You have no idea. She's in billions of debt and Gil.
Magic the Gathering. Starring Rinoa Hartley. Yeah, do you know about the additional scene in 8 if you take Rinoa to the garden with you when you rescue the garden?
Yep,
there's an extra little scene. It's a good scene. Yeah, it's a good little thing that I didn't know about until years later.
You didn't always have Rinoa in the party with Squall?
No, because we've talked about this before, because you've got to have a hot girl summer and send the girls to the missile base.
You're right, yeah. And as we all know, there's no summer hotter than 3 girls going to a missile base to sabotage it.
3 girls going to a missile base in sweaty male uniforms.
YRP can only dream of what RQS have.
That was very quick. Well done. What can I do for you, missiles? What can I do for you, missiles? I've said, what can I do for you twice in this episode, and I have no embarrassment about that whatsoever.
So that brings us right to the very end. I think we've gone through all of our numbers. We will be posting our individual couples lists on Blue Sky and or Twitter. Again, we refuse to call it X. It will never be X. But overall, just like with our mainline games, we actually have a few ties here. So rather than read out the full list right now, I've got a couple of tiebreakers for you, Jack. So, number 1, who do you prefer? Freya Fratley or Cloud and Tifa?
Well, I'm going to say Cloud and Tifa just to spite you.
Okay, you know what? I'll accept it.
Sellers and Locke was far too low. I'm disgusted.
Okay, in that case, who do you prefer? Sarah and Snow or Clive and Jill?
See, the thing is, I prefer Sarah to Jill, but I prefer Clive to Snow.
Yep.
But I think I prefer Clive to Snow by such a large margin. It's got to be Clive and Jill.
Okay, that's more than fine.
I mean, if I was stuck in a lift with Clive or Snow, I'd rather be stuck in a lift with Clive.
I've got another 3-way tie here for you. Locke and Sally's, Dion and Terence, and Laguna and Rain. How are you ranking these?
Well, I'm afraid Locke and Sally's have got to go at the top.
Okay.
God. Whew, I know I've ranked them lower, but I think you've convinced me that I think Dion or Sion and Terence go in the middle.
Okey-doke.
And then we'll have Rain and Laguna, because I think Rain and Laguna was a had to be on the list. I didn't really care where it went as long as it was there.
Just as long as it was there.
So,
except you would have kicked off if it was in last place. I know you would have.
that was a whole thing. You were distracting me by talking about flipping Princess Garnet and flipping Beatrix, and that's when you went off and did your maths, and I just went off on a tangent for 25 minutes. Anyway, carry on.
We have Squall and Rinoa and Cecil and Rosa.
Oh!
I know, it's getting difficult, isn't it?
You get me to do the tiebreak, so we're going to agree on it.
I think if we disagree with the tiebreaks, we might be here all day, so I'm just going to give veto power to you.
Really? Oh, okay. All right, then, fine. Squall and Rinoa win, then.
That's more than fine. And for our final tiebreaker, Tidus and Yuna or Zack and Aerith.
God.
It's hard, isn't it?
I'm going to put Zack and Aerith on top.
Fuck yes.
No, I think you convinced me there. I think that's right.
Fuck yes.
That's reasonable.
Okay.
See, you show how we influence each other over this course of this. So you've kind of gone there. Now you have veto rights, but you trust me to make the right decision.
Well, yeah, because I know you're not entirely wrong. Just mostly.
No, you're only wrong once a list.
Right. So now that we've tie broken, for our final rankings, going from the bottom and right up to the top, number 16, to no one's surprise, we have Cyan and Elaine.
It's correct position.
At number 15, we have Luna and Noctis. At number 14, we have Freya and Fratley. 13 is Cloud and Tifa. 12 is Sarah and Snow. At number 11 is Clive and Jill. Now into the top 10. From 10, we have Ash and Razzler. At 9, we have Edward and Anna, who I never thought would top a lot of these people already. This is insane.
Oh, God.
At number 8, we have Laguna and Rain. Number 7 is Dion and Terrence. And number 6 is Locke and Sally's. Number 5 is Garnet and Zidane. Number 4 is Cecil and Rosa. Number 3, Squall and Renoa. Number 2, Tidus and Yuna, which means that our top reigning EXP required sanctioned couple is Zack and Aerith.
Yes, and I knew that would because it was the last tiebreak, and I know that you would have spat feathers.
Yeah,
of
I should have
Tidus
gone at a
and Yuna
different
would have
order.
been Zack and... No, I think that's really... I think that actually, like, it proves that we write well together, because that's a really good
Yeah,
list.
honestly, looking at it, I don't really have any quarrels with them. Like, yeah, I didn't pick any of those positions for the most part, like, myself, but I don't really have a problem with any of them.
I think Edward and Anna are really weirdly
Yeah.
high, but I think that because we both weren't that fussed,
Yeah.
and they just ended up in the middle somewhere.
Congratulations, guys.
Yeah, well done. You made it in, you spoony bards.
So before we sign off then, Jack, I've got one more very, very important question for you. We've gone through all of the Final Fantasy best couples, but we haven't inserted ourselves into this list. So
Why did you have to say it like that, Mol?
the ultimate question here then, Jack, is who's your top pick for yourself? Out of the entire franchise, we're both going to get a pick. One guy, one girl. Gender and sexuality is non-existent for this moment in the podcast. This is simply vibes-based. This is your ultimate heart pick, Jack. Who are you taking on a date, or who are you being taken on a date by?
God almighty. I've just thought of, like, what came to my head as a bloke.
It's Seymour, isn't it?
It's not Seymour, no.
Kuja?
It's Kuja.
Yeah, baby!
It's gotta be Kuja. It's gotta be Kuja. It's gotta be.
It's the hips, isn't it? They lured you in.
You said sex wasn't a real thing. It's nothing to do with his hips. It's his banging theme song.
Honestly, if that played every time you entered a room, you wouldn't really be upset, would you?
Please stop saying enter. Please stop saying enter.
Okay, yeah, Kuja, okay. And what's your date of choice with Kuja? Long walk on the beach, destruction of another planet?
We're going to go do some auctioneering.
Nice.
No, that's true. I think I'd like to get on the back of his dragon. You know, that'd be cool. That was my male choice. I think
my male choice is, it's going to have to be the one, the only, Alcid Margrace from Final Fantasy XII.
Okay.
Listen, if I'm going to be wooed by someone, I want someone who knows what he's doing. I want a great accent, and I want him to respect it if I say no. And I think Alcid has all of those. The downside, of course, is that if I give him a hug, I'm going to get lost in that chest hair.
Whew, cool. Right. Female then.
I had a really hard time picking a lady. And not just because...
Because there's so many to choose from.
There's so many to choose from, and it's not just because I'm gay as hell, it's because I didn't know which way the wind was blowing.
Why did you let me sip my drink before you said that? Oh, warn me.
My
God.
bad, sorry. But I've narrowed it down to 3, technically 2, and I think there's really only one that I'm gonna pick, judging by the smiley faces that I've put next to their names. So my third option on this list is Maluda Falls from Tactics.
Of course.
I think she'd probably be fun to hang out with once or twice, but then I was like, if I'm going to get introduced to her family, I don't want to be anywhere near Wheatgrass, so I'm taking her off the list. Number 2 is Fang from 13.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah.
Can't not. Again, I think that's a fantastic, like, you know, couple dates, but then you see her ex or her current partner and you're like, I don't want to get in the way of that. I'm just going to bow out respectively. Yeah, number 1 position goes to General Beatrix. I think she could treat a lady right.
Why am I not surprised? You just wanted a way to shoehorn Beatrix into this episode, didn't you, really? Even though you took her out... in fact, that was what it was. When you took her out of the shortlist with Steiner, you just basically cock-blocked Steiner.
Yeah, I'll do that any day of the week. Listen, this is the day of hearts and roses, and what has she got on her back of her coat? A rose! What about yourself, Jack?
I'm afraid it's got to be Tifa. I know it's the simp's way out, and I thought about this because I didn't go for the fuck, marry, kill thing at that point. I don't know. She's hot. She's a practical woman, but also has a soft side. And I think that's usually because I go for people like me, though I don't know if I'm that hot. I do, however, have a massive chest and love cats. So there's that.
You've got plenty in common with her then.
Yeah, that's most things in common with her, pretty much. But I think as you've gone into more colourful areas there, obviously Gensiana has to be on the list because, my God, that woman's sexy. Who else do we think? Oh, there's so many.
I know you mentioned Lulu offline when I first brought this up.
Oh, Lulu. I mean, that's just goes without saying, doesn't it? Lulu is just as beautiful. I think Lulu's character as well is again, I've talked a lot about how I don't particularly like damsels in distress, unless they're done well and they stop being the damsel in distress at some point, because I think it's because it's overdone. You know what I mean? And obviously Lulu isn't really the damsel in distress. I like Lulu's journey through that game, and she's also very attractive. Princess Garnet, after she has the haircut.
After the haircut, okay.
Oh, that haircut scene, that's so cool.
It's a strong scene, isn't it?
It's a strong scene. That is yeah, and Princess Garnet as well. I think vibes. I'd vibe with Princess Garnet. I'd be better for Garnet than Zidane ever was.
Brilliant. So from all of us at EXP Required, happy Valentine's Day. Hope you're having a wonderful time with the person that you love or the people that you love. Remember that romantic love is not the be-all, end-all. But more importantly...
Be safe.
Be safe. We love you. Final Fantasy loves you. Who cares about anything else? Where can we find you online, Jack?
You can find me on Blue Sky at JackieBoy34. I'm still just about on Twitter as JackMullen8. Mainly now, obviously, with our stuff, we can find us mostly on YouTube at EXP-podcast, but we are EXP Required over there, and also on Spotify and other places as well. What about yourself, Mel?
As usual, Blue Sky and Twitter. Anywhere that I have a social media account, I will be at Adramelech. However, as usual, I am very, very swamped, and I don't often have the time to check social media. EXP Required is the place to find me specifically, or if there is anything that you need me specifically for, just shoot us an email. We have that on our socials page as well.
Brilliant. Fantastic. Thanks for everyone. Happy Valentine's Day. See you next time.
Happy Valentine's Day. Bye-bye.